Okay, welcome to One Stop Co-op Shop. This is Steve. I'm here with Terence.
Hey, just jumping since Peter couldn't make it on Friday yesterday, just jump into a different one-stop co-op shop stream.
That's right. You seem like you're always on a stream sometime during the week, so thanks for helping me out here.
Yeah.
Yes. So we're here at the co-op chat. If you're new to this is a segment where we cover some cooperative news at first, and then we go into discussion topic. So we'll do those two things. Discussion topic this week will be about living card games and the deck building about aspects of them. So that's why Terrence is here, because he's kind of our resident living card game expert on One Stop Co-op Shop. And then we'll do the giveaway at the end. So if you entered into that, well, we'll see who wins that dice tray. Okay, let's jump into it right away. So first thing I want to cover is the upcoming Kickstarters this week. And like I said, I will be focused on the cooperative one, so we'll run through this list, and we'll go from there. So the first one is Escape from the Asylum. This is a 1 to 6 player cooperative escape room game. It's 2 chapters, and the setting is you are in an insane asylum, and you're trying to uncover your past and also escape from the premise. So that was launching this Tuesday, a couple days from now. The next one I'll talk about, coming to Kickstarter also this Tuesday, is Velocity Vanguard. This is a space battle mission-based cooperative game. The interesting thing about this one is it has physics in it, in the sense that if I'm flying in a certain direction and I want to change the direction, I have got momentum I have to take into account. And so you won't be able to turn on a dime if you're going too fast, for example. So you keep that in your mind when you're playing this game, and you can customize your ships. But yeah, this one, I'm interested to learn more about it, because I don't know, something about the space theme sounds interesting to me. The next one, which I just actually closed, was Wild Ascent. That's coming to Kickstarter in a few days. Oops. So that one is your cooperatively going against monsters. So something similar to what's the other games that came up recently? There's so many of them nowadays. Monster
It's like a
Hunter. Go ahead.
is it a boss battler?
Yeah, Boss Battler. So like Monster Hunter and Primal. So I get that vibe from it. The other one I pulled up right now is Millennium War. This one is also coming to Kickstarter. This one I'm really interested in. I don't know if it's something that I personally like, but I kind of want to know more about it. It is a MOBA type game. So if you're familiar with MOBAs, it is something like Defenders of the Ancient Dota. Yeah, Defenders of the Ancient. That's what it stands for. Where you have lanes and goons, and you're trying to take down bases and hopefully get to the main base and destroy it. And you do that by controlling different characters and powering them up, and having these teams of characters you work together. Interesting thing about this one, it comes with a smart dial. So this dial actually magnetizes to the bottom of the miniatures, and you can keep track of all your stats, like your health and your magic, and I think your strength as well. The other thing I like about this is there's also a standee option. So it's nice to have that option, so you don't have to dump all that money from miniatures if you don't want it. That's Millennium War. So those are the major Kickstarters coming out this week, the cooperative ones. So I'll put links down below if you guys want to check them out. The links that I do have, at least. The other news I want to talk about is just general news. So Dead Men Tell No Tales. This is an older game. It's kind of a pandemic-ish type game. At least, well, maybe that's not the best way of describing it, honestly. It is, you are pirates entering a ship, and the ship's on fire, and trying to steal all the gold and loot before the ship burns to the ground on this open seas. I know Colin has played this one. He seemed to really like it. It's coming back to print after being hard to find, so I'm excited to check that one out.
I feel like the last Kickstarter had like a big Kraken.
It did, yes. I mean, what you gotta get it. It's Kraken. So funny
Release the
story.
Kraken.
My wife happened to be watching Clash of the Titans on TV, and she had the volume pretty low, and I was doing something else on time, and I had to pause her. I'm like, wait, stop! Give me the remote. And I cranked up the volume for the the line. Release the Kraken because I had to crank that up, and then I turned the volume down. Like, okay, here you go. You can go back to watching. So, yeah, that's too much fun. The other one, which is something that I've been particularly excited about, is Defenders of the Realm, the last expansions for this game. This is the last time to get the product. They have confirmed that. This is one that when I was getting to board games, I played this one a ton. And it is, a lot of people describe it as fantasy pandemic. You're running around trying to take down 4 generals before they reach the capital city, and your fantasy characters, you gathering loot, going on quests, and trying to stop the undead army from overtaking the board. This is adding some promised expansions, which I was excited for. Heroes Calling, which lets you build your own hero, which is pretty cool. Companions and Catacombs, which now adds dungeons to delve into to get some sweet loot, and companions so you can actually hire more party members to follow along with you. And then the revised board, because honestly the original board wasn't great, and this is hoping to improve that. The last thing I want to talk about for news is Arkham Horror, the card game. And this is not a new game, obviously, but they have redone their packaging for the core set. So this is more akin to, I believe, the same size box as Marvel Champions.
Yep.
And it sounds like what they did is, instead of separating out the cards where you kind of have to buy multiple cores, it sounds like this is more akin to buying a single product and getting more of those cards for more players, is what my understanding.
Yeah, they're changing the organization, and so the decks will be like the investigators will be next to basically a pre-constructed deck for that investigator. So that's how you're gonna get like multiple of cards. I think MJ confirmed, the lead designer said you can get like 10 knives in this box.
Cool.
So it'll be much easier, I think, to kind of get started out of the box. And then the other kind of, I think, some of the other big things that you get out of it is that they're including some of the like higher XP cards from the Dunwich cycle.
Yep.
So you'll have more options when you're upgrading your characters. So you are getting a little bit more than just more core set, which obviously is great in of itself. And so it's just like you love to see it. I think that the mistake they made in Marvel Champions, the marketing mistake they made in Marvel Champions of labeling it 1 to 4 on the box, and then them actually like putting a full play set of cards in. It's kind of nice to see, as a long time LCG player of. I mean, Arkham luckily was only 2 core sets to get a full playable set, but Lord of the Rings and almost everyone before Arkham was 3. So
right,
it's nice to buy. It's priced at least in the US, MSRP at $60, so $20 more than I think the kind of original core that you're gonna get, or 15, I think, because they raised the price to 45.
Yeah, I think they raised the price. The other thing I want to call out too, which was nice of Fantasy Flight, is if you have the previous core set, you don't have to buy this one. Like, the only differences are like the cards are included in there. But those cards, if you buy the later packs, you have those cards already. And then the only other differences is alternate art, which it
looks super nice though.
It does look nice. So
I'm probably going to grab this when it's on sale sometime. Like I don't need it now. I think the other thing is you get the first player token. I think they have some nicer.
Oh right, the first player tokens. Oh, that's right, the tokens, because they also, I think they made a double-sided or something and made 3 on one side, 1 on the other, or something like that.
Yeah, I think so.
Yeah.
Yeah, the tokens are supposed to be like not a like quality upgrade necessarily. Though I do think like FG in general has like, as far as cardboard tokens go, like they're definitely up there for nice cardboard tokens.
Yeah.
Both in art and kind of thickness and stuff. I feel like FG doesn't often do double-sided tokens, so if that's a thing they're doing, that'll be really nice.
Yeah, I'm not sure, but yeah, they are doing more tokens at least. So yeah, I see a 5 for the gear you get. So yep. So yeah, that is all the news I want to cover real fast. So if you like this type of information, let us know. If you want to hear a little bit more and not go through as quick, I can do that too. But I'm just here to give you some heads up on what's going on with cooperative games. Okay, let's dive into the discussion topic. So this week, we want to talk over the living card games, which, how coincidental we ended on this news topic before talking about it, right? But one thing that we hear a lot of is, which games should I buy? Let's say you want to get into a living card game, but you're not sure. And I think a really big driver for it is on the deck building side of it. Like that is, at least talking on our Discord, some folks like the ability to build decks ahead of time in different fashions. Some of them will like a little bit of an easier entry into that. So we'll talk about that and comparing chats across the board. So I guess I'll start off the conversation real quick and talking about which one do I think is the easiest one to deck build for. And I think the answer for that for me is by far Marvel Champions. And I say that because two factors. One, the nice thing is you buy a pack and it comes pre-constructed, right? You don't even have to deck build if you don't want to. It's like, oh, here's a hero. And I think the base sets of how they build them is pretty solid, honestly. Like, I like tweaking things. I really like deck building a lot, or customizing it quite a bit. So, but it's a nice one when you don't need to do that. Hey, Ryan and Alex, thanks for joining. So, what are your thoughts, Terence? Do you agree that?
I agree with that. I think there's a few things that kind of. I mean, obviously the pre-con thing is one. They tried that in Arkham 2 with the Investigator decks. They released 5, one for each kind of class. I guess is what they're called. Always forget the terminology between the various games. But yeah, you have like one for each of the different things, and it also comes with upgrade cards, which are nice for Arkham.
Right.
But yeah, Marvel is the easiest, I think, because they limit you to a single aspect for the most part. There are a few heroes that kind of buck the trend. I believe only 2 right now, and there's only 3, I think, in total that we know that kind of change that formula up a little bit. But the decks are only 40 cards, 40 to 50 cards. And the fact that 15 of those cards are cards you can't change out means you're only picking 25 cards.
Right.
And in that signature set, generally most of those cards are going to be kind of undercosted for how strong they are too, because they're meant to be these powerful abilities that are unique to that hero. That's not like always true across the board, but generally that's going to be true. Like they've said, like an equivalent thing in an aspect or even the basic are going to cost more to do the same kind of effect. So you're starting out with like 15 cards that are meant to synergize with your hero's ability. And so you kind of can just pick an aspect and then pick some basic and aspect cards, kind of go with it. And if you've watched Peter on stream, I think he said like sometimes he basically never plays anything but his signature cards. So like everything else is just a resource card, right? And what makes it even easier is that like 3 of those cards can be these double resource cards. So you already have like it's very rare. It's definitely possible, and there's definitely heroes that don't want it. But you're almost auto include, and they put it in almost every pre-con. Like I have literally, I don't know, like as many double energy and genius and strength cards as there are heroes, except for like I think Star-Lord didn't come with them. So like -1 hero, I have like that many copies of those cards because they put them in every single pre-con. So like now you're talking about only like 22 cards, right, that you have to come up with, and that's just like way less than I think any other deck on the game.
Agreed.
Or LCG rather.
Hey, welcome Snow, and by the way, Just Tom is giving you a hard time, Terrence. He says, "Hey, you need to clean your bed." He's giving you crap. Yes.
Nice.
But no, I completely agree with everything you said there. Yeah, because you have a lot of the cards already set for you. You only have to fill a smaller gap. And generally, like you said before, you're only looking at a subset of the aspect cards, right? The other cards you can get. Like, you're looking at what? Well, not quite 25% of the cards available to you. So Alex says, of the current LCG games, I agree that Marvel Champions is the easiest to deck build. The Dead Star Wars LCG, he said, was also super easy to deck build. Literally pick 10 objective sets and you're ready to go. That's a great point. Because that was nice in that you had groups of cards to grab. So instead of like grabbing, hey, I want one or two or three copies of this specific card, with the Star Wars one, you grabbed, I want this group of cards, and you had to take, I can't remember how many were in the set, but whatever it was, you would all add all those cards into it, so you had less variability in that sense, but it still worked well from a deck
It
building
was
aspect.
it was 6 cards in a pod. It's called the pod system.
Ah, thank you.
But only 5 went in the commander deck, is what they called it, I believe.
Mm-hmm.
Because one of the cards was an objective, so you'd have an objective deck. So every pod had an objective as the first card in the set, and then 5 cards that would go in the commander, and then you could basically only have 2 of any pod in that thing. So you'd have to build a 50 card deck, which means you have to pick 10 pods. Yeah, it was a really cool system. It was very different, very unique deck building system. I don't know. I think maybe in the early game it was okay or it was like not super hard, but I definitely think uh, like pod building is not necessarily the easiest thing either, right? Like
Right.
having to figure out and kind of build some of that stuff. But yeah, you definitely are making a lot less choices, right?
Yeah, and I think that ties into one of the comments I want to make about what I find, at least, from one difficulty with deck building is sometimes if it's restricted enough, like talking about Marvel Champions, you have less cards added in there. We are looking at 25 cards outside of the signature cards. Of course, you can only change, and then in that you can choose generally one aspect and a bunch of commons, right, that you can pick from. But on the flip side, and maybe it's just me, but if it's an open model where it can basically add any card in it, like I'll bring in Lord of the Rings here as a talking point. I find that easier too because I'm not worried over in my head of all these restrictions necessarily. Now, the flip side is I have to be careful how I build the deck to accommodate those different cards because, especially with Lord of the Rings, you need to have the resources to pay for those cards from those specific sources. It's not just like a generic source of resources. I need to make sure I have the right spheres to pay for those. So it's a little more tricky on that side. But for me, at least, I found Lord of the Rings deck building more difficult than Champions, but probably more of the medium range because it's more open for me.
Yeah, I guess I can see both sides of that. I
Mm-hmm.
think if you're kind of used to kind of deck building before, Lord of the Rings probably feels the most familiar because it
Right.
has a lot of the magic tropes that were popularized by. I mean, it's the 800-pound gorilla of like deck like CCGs, right? For sure. So like you'll feel right at home to some degree. Obviously, you have to like learn the nuances of the game, the system, but you'll see a lot of those card mechanisms that I think uh, like there's definitely like I feel like the different archetypes and stuff in Lord of the Rings are much more aligned to kind of what you will see in not 100%, but like in some of the other games, and they're probably not nearly as prevalent, I think, in Marvel and Arkham. Like they definitely have those things, but Lord of the Rings just has it like to a much bigger amount, right? But I think like any of those kind of things, like deck construction is just simply easier once you have the card pulled to some degree in your head. So like even though, for instance, like Arkham may be harder than Marvel Champions, like we're saying. I think for a lot of people, as they got like, if you grow with the card pool, you're able to winnow down very quickly because there tends to be staples. It's like, oh, if I'm
Right.
building a Guardian, like these are kind of the best weapons. There's certain investigators or whatever that may change that up because of synergy with their investigator. But generally, I feel like if you are building those investigators enough, like you tend to be able to kind of spot the patterns and know the cards that you're going to auto include, right? It's like you're probably the most familiar with Lord of the Rings, so it's just like, okay, if I'm building a spirit deck, I probably am going to automatically include tests as well. most
What?
likely.
What card is that? Sorry, I have to give Terence crap because he gives me a hard time because most of the time I don't include that card just because I used it so much in the past, and so I try not to use it. So, but it's a great card. You're exactly right. So,
Yeah, so there tend to be staples in a lot of these games. So like the more you
yeah,
play, the more like those kind of it's just easier to put a deck together. Like I know a lot of people complain about constructing decks for these games, but like I can probably put it may not be a great deck, but I can put a deck together like in probably 5 to 10 minutes
yeah,
in most of these games, right? Like just
yeah.
because you know the card pool. For me personally, Arkham is the hardest, not because Arkham has a harder deck building than Lord of the Rings. I think probably if you had equal experience for all of them, Lord of the Rings would be the hardest just because one, it has the largest card pool. So you just have to know more about the game. But Arkham is the one I have the least experience playing. Like I only have 40 plays on the dot for Arkham, and I have over 300 for Marvel, and I only have 195 logged for Lord of the Rings, but that's
Oh
only
my
for the
gosh.
last like 3 years.
Only 195. What are we doing? Just kidding.
Yeah,
Those are insane
yeah, yeah,
plays.
yeah. My first 5 years or so, like I didn't know of BGG, and I was just playing Lord of the Rings, so none of
Sure.
those plays are logged. But
Hey, Shrey, thanks for joining us. Yeah, and honestly, in the chat, if you guys have any other comments you guys want to ask us, we are focusing on this topic, but honestly, we are open to covering any questions you guys may have. Yeah, so talk about the Arkham. Let's talk about that deck building a little bit. Um, so that one, you're choosing a investigator, and the investigator then defines what type of cards you can add into the deck you're creating. Um, the nice thing about Arkham that's easier from Lord of the Rings is like Lord of the Rings. I feel like you tend to go through more of your deck, or a lot of your deck, or potentially if you want to, you can design so you go through the full deck in the whole game. And in Arkham, because you don't generally draw as many cards, and honestly, sometimes you don't want to draw as many cards, that can be good or bad, right? In how you build it. It might mean that you might not see certain cards, so it's not as important, but at the same time, if you have key cards, you want to make sure those come up somehow.
I guess I would push back. Like, I think it really depends on how you build your deck in Lord of the Rings. Like,
Sure.
I don't draw through my entire deck. Like, it's only not like Marvel Champions, which
Right.
I think has the most lenient design because it is more like a deck builder kind of mechanism of like you're drawing a whole hand of cards. So, like, for a lot of heroes, that's like 5 cards a turn, like net new cards if you're not holding anything, right?
Right.
And on the low end, you get 4, right? And both Arkham and Lord of the Rings are top decking, so like
Exactly.
you have the same mechanism. I mean the Arkham deck's only 30 cards, right, versus the Lord of the Rings 50. I think there's less card draw mechanics in Arkham for sure than Lord of the Rings, which is maybe what you're kind of getting at. But
Correct.
um, yeah, I mean there's definitely you definitely have to build a little bit for consistency. But they have a significantly stronger mulligan effect to kind of I think make up for that, right? So in Arkham Horror, your mulligan you draw 5 cards, and then you can basically set aside any cards that you want to keep, and then any other card you take out, and then you draw that many cards back into your hand, and then you shuffle. Whereas Lord of the Rings is you draw 6 cards. If you don't like your hand, you have to shuffle the entire hand back in and then draw 6 more cards. So even if there is one card you wanted in that hand, you better really want that one card,
Right.
to not take that mulligan. So you're definitely like I think Arkham's definitely trying to set you up for success on that first turn.
For sure. For sure. Yeah, and I think the other we talked a little bit more is dead cards. Like in Lord of the Rings, you can absolutely have dead cards in your hand. Where it's a if you have, for example, unique cards, you can only have one out in play, and if you already played it, well, then this other card in your hand is just going to take up space. Now, the plus side is there are frequently negative effects in the game that cause you to get rid of cards to play or discard cards from your hand. So in that case, the dead card can have a use, and you can also use that in your some of the other cards in the game that says, "Hey, discard this card to gain an effect," right? But generally, unless you're prepared for it or the scenario allows for it, you could have dead cards in your hand. On the flip side, with Marvel Champions, literally every card is a resource. And so you will never have any dead cards in your hand. So I feel like from that standpoint, if you're building for it, it's okay to make a mistake with adding a card that you just won't play, because guess what? It can always be used as a resource. And Arkham is similar to that sense, because at least you can use it for the skill test, right? So I think those are more
Yeah.
forgiving on the resource aspect of it and balancing it, as opposed to Lord of the Rings, which you need to make sure you watch that resource curve and get the proper support for paying for those cards.
You do get 3 resources a turn though in
That's
Lord of the
true.
Rings versus 1 in Arkham.
That's true.
So yeah, the skill tests are great. Like oftentimes, like in Arkham, have found that you only, because it costs you actions. Like Arkham has an action economy, right? So because it costs you actions to play cards, you also aren't necessarily like playing a ton of cards, like building out your board state to the same extent you are going to be in Lord of the Rings, and to some extent Marvel for some of those, for a lot of the heroes. Um, and so like there's definitely like some crucial assets, or I guess allies or assets and stuff as well, that you kind of want out. And then the rest are going to be used for skill tests, like you're saying, which is kind of the W side of it, except for obviously the skill cards, which can only be used as skill tests.
Hmm.
Um, and then there's also some cards like that don't actually have skill test icons, but that's kind of rare too. Um, so a few exceptions to the W's card. I think that's also true in Marvel Champions.
Yep.
There's some rare exceptions that don't actually have resource icons on them. But the so like you're definitely not playing as many cards in Arkham, and then you're going to be using you will be playing events, and then it definitely puts high value on cards that say have the fast keyword in Arkham, which is something to take into account, because those don't cost you actions to put out or to play as events. And so that kind of makes a big difference in that game. Um,
Yeah, and I think it's a good point. Like, if you are playing Arkham, there is more than just playing the cards out of your hand. Like in my opinion, Marvel Champions is focused so much on the cards in your hand. Which card should I discard to play the other cards in my hand? It's a really fun puzzle. And Lord of the Rings, you're going through your deck to try to pull out the synergies and combos that you put in there to elevate that. And in Arkham, yes, you have a tableau, but you also don't have to necessarily play the cards in your hand, well, to some extent, because you have actions, right? It's action based, so you can do other stuff on the board. Ryan's got a comment here. So I love card games and deck builds in general. However, I hate deck construction, especially because I don't have the time and money to know the whole card pool. Yeah, that's a really good point, Ryan. It's a lot to understand the card pool, and especially when you're looking at a game like Lord of the Rings, which what 9 years of support or 10 years of support, something like that.
it's nine
9 years,
years.
yeah, that's a huge card pool to get hold of, and even with Marvel Champions, getting regular support and Arkham, I mean, all these games are gonna have a huge pool at their end of their life. What happens to be? I mean, that's the nature of the beast, and it really does help a lot to get in on it when it starts. For that reason, it's easier to understand the pool and kind of follow the meta as the pool grows and figure out what the staples are. That's a big thing. I Go ahead.
I will kind of challenge that to some degree. I feel like the game is at its best because all these games require enough cards to make, if you're into deck building interesting.
Yeah.
And obviously to Ryan's comment, like maybe you aren't like all like, I think both Arkham and Marvel, probably more so than Lord of the Rings, like have pretty solid core sets kind of things where there aren't too many downsides. You can just pick that up and play it, and not doing the deck building and just use the precons, and it's a pretty decent experience. It's just gonna have limited replayability. And a big advantage I think of LCGs is that it's kind of always expanding. But I have found by like cycle 3, when they've kind of done their third wave of the product, like it's where it really opens the door to like uh, coming up with decks that aren't necessarily always the same as someone else who came up with that deck. Because if you have a limited card pool, like it's just like, oh, if I'm building Daisy and I want to have, the tomes and stuff, like there's only so many of those that are actually in the card pool. So like I'm probably going to build a deck that looks very similar to someone else. But like you fast forward to Arkham today, like there's a lot more choices, right?
Right.
Being like 6-7 cycles in, I think. And so I actually think it's getting in at year 3, which is what I did for Lord of the Rings, is actually also a sweet spot if you're looking to that.
for sure.
Kind of to answer the I'm not interested in building kind of the decks or having the time and space to know the card pool. We get that a lot actually in the Discord, and probably Marvel Champions is the easiest in that sense, just because like we said at the beginning of the stream, there are the pre-cons. You can just buy a hero pack. Those decks are decent. They're not necessarily going to be like top tier decks necessarily, but you can just buy a pack for like $15 and then you have a pre-constructed deck to kind of go. But all these games have community resources that are out there. So there's Marvel CDB, for deck building. There's Arkham DB and there's Rings DB, and they're all kind of built off of kind of the same code base that started. I think the Thrones DB was the original one, and you can find popular decks or the kind of ones where also people have limited card pull is another popular kind of thing where people try to deck build with constraints. In Lord of the Rings, there's a system that people call progression style, where like you only play with the card pool as it releases for the quests that have come out, and so you're not necessarily bringing quests or cards in from like year 9 to like a year 1 quest necessarily. So you can find those kind of decks there. And then all those sites as well, when you open any of those decks, they will tell you the packs that are required. So you can also in search when you create an account, edit and say what is in your collection, and you can have it restrict searches based off of cards that you actually own. So you don't necessarily get a bunch of really cool decks that you can never actually build because you don't own those cards for whatever reason. Or if you do not own, you do find a deck that someone links you to, but you don't own necessarily all the cards. I know on Rings DB, it will show in orange cards that you don't own. So potentially there might be a card that isn't necessarily crucial to that deck that you could potentially replace. So you definitely have options there. Like it's very common. Like I think probably Arkham more than any of the other games. I've found people in our Discord say like they don't like deck building, but they net deck. And one of the nice things about some of the Arkham deck construction that has been brought up a lot in our Discord has just been, it is so campaign based. Like you can do one-offs, but the game is built around campaign. So like if you net deck like a single investigator, you're going to play that scenario, you're going to get some XP, and you're going to play 7 more scenarios for 8 total scenarios. So you're playing a single deck that is going to change, but like at least it's like the core is this one deck, and then you don't have to necessarily listen to the guides of like how this deck is going to get leveled up. Like some of the Arkham decks that are published have these like mini novellas, I feel like, of like how to run this deck, because it's not only like how you play it, but then also how you upgrade the deck and what upgrades are more important as you get XP from playing the various scenarios. So you can get kind of that like upgrade thing, like whether you want to follow the guide or whether you want to just do it yourself. At least you kind of get that option, but at least you're running a single deck through a bunch of games.
Yeah, and Ryan mentioned he also finds those deck building sites super useful when playing on Tabletop Simulator, because you don't have to construct a deck. You just pick one and just play it. And especially on like Tabletop Sim or Octagon, you can just download it and then upload it into those systems and start playing it. It's really, really quick and quick and sweet how that works. The other thing I remember when using those sites is, I know the Lord of the Rings one specifically had a recommendation. So as I was building a deck, as I was entering certain cards, it would query decks that can include that card and kind of query like which were the most common cards used with that other card I just added. And so basically it would essentially provide a list of card recommendations based upon what you're starting to build on, which is kind of cool. It was a nice way of filtering out, like you said, those staples that you might want to learn about.
Yeah, I think Rings and Arkham both do it. I don't think Marvel has that in their
I,
their deck building site that I've seen.
yeah, I assume I'll have it at some point, but we'll see. And Ryan does say also, he says, I think if I'm going into a game fairly new, he's more of a fan of the deck building in the game, like Time to Underdark or Moonraker, as opposed to deck construction, as opposed to LCGs. And I think that can be a pretty popular, common approach, right? Because deck building, you throw the game down, in a standard deck building game where deck building is the mechanic, not like an outside part of the game, uh, you have generally a set marketplace, so you can look at those cards and figure out what combos you want from that. It's kind of restricted in that sense, or you have a essentially a river of cards in front of you, and 5 or 6 cards, and then as you buy one and replace with another one. So either of those type styles, it's looking at what you have in front of you and seeing how to make that work, as opposed to looking at the card pool. And like how I do my deck construction is I like to find, hey, this card's cool. How can I make this card work? Or what can I do that's really interesting about this card? And then you have this big wide breadth of content to sort through and figure out how you want to make it work. And I played Magic the Gathering a lot growing up, so I was used to that style of play. So I was really excited when I came across a cooperative version in Lord of the Rings, was my first exposure to the living card games. So that was definitely down my alley. But I can totally understand how that can be very overwhelming, or not everyone's cup of tea.
Yeah, we get that comment a lot. I feel like when LCGs come up of people preferring deck builders because they feel Howard, I think specifically, always says it feels like work or
Yeah,
homework, and I don't
right,
want to do that. I guess like similar to Steve, like my approach is different from that. Like I I probably spend just as much time out of. I mean, I don't know what the exact minutes or hours or whatever, but I only spend just as much time out of the game, but I consider that fun. Like it's not necessarily, it's
right,
not work to me. It's like oh, it's part of exploration. I think that's what you like to call it. Like I love games that have deep exploration, whether that's exploring it within the game. But there's something nice about being able to do it, but not having to like bust the game out and set it up, and still kind of being uh, in the game of like this is the stuff that you love, and kind of thinking and being able to talk to people about it. And LCGs for me were such a big breakthrough of like it was always frustrating in Magic of like you had to buy singles or kind of get all the cards to build it. And one of the really cool things was if Steve built a cool deck or I see a cool combo that he does, like I can go home and build it if I own all the cards, right?
right, right.
And it's like feasible and very common for people to own everything, whereas it is pretty infeasible, I think, in any CCG for someone to own everything. You're probably just going to own the cards you need to build the decks that you want to build
Right.
as the meta keeps changing.
Right.
And so that was kind of a breakthrough for me. But yeah, I mean, it's like a lot of fun. I even build decks that I don't play. Like Colin did the stream recently for the Aleph stuff, which is the fan made expansion for Lord of the Rings. He played through that kind of deluxe box with 3 quests, and I helped him build. I have not even played any of those decks, but I helped him build those decks that he played on stream, and like also the was the charity stream we did or that you all did, Extra Life.
Yeah, Extra Life.
Right?
Yep. Yep.
Yeah, when they did the Lord of the Rings thing, I helped build all 3 of those decks.
Mm-hmm.
Which again, I don't think I've actually played those 3 decks that I built, right? But like there is a joy of it for me that is like being able to like piece the puzzles together, seeing the combos, and actually like make it work in those constraints that I find fun.
Yeah.
It's just I guess a little less dynamic, but it's like a clean room environment.
Yeah, and I think that nails why I enjoy these types of games, and I enjoy deck builds for the same reason. Like taking these components, put them together, and making it work, and seeing what I can do with it. Because that, for me, that exploration side of it is so fun for me, and I enjoyed in this type of construction, deck construction type, and deck building. Doesn't matter to me. I just love it. And I'm a little bit different in the sense that I like doing weird stuff, like trying to break the game, like almost where in Lord of the Rings I played with a deck with only a single hero, and the hero cannot attack, quest, or defend, which is basically everything you can do in the game. But just try to see if you can make it work. So Snow has a comment here that says, "I like more if LCGs had either recommended decks, like the Saga ones in Lord of the Rings have, or if the cards were split into sections, so you would be somewhat limited in deck building." Yep. That's and I think in Lord of the Rings at least they started having deck lists at some point in the deluxe boxes, if I remember correctly.
No, I think they only did those in sagas. I
Oh, it was
don't.
only the
I
sagas. Okay.
Because the problem with the deluxes is like I feel like in theory you can just use the deluxe and play with a core, but like you you ain't beating those quests with one core set and like a deluxe box, like
Right.
whereas like I mean I do think the saga is actually really hard if you get to some of those later scenarios and stuff. Like they're not easy, but kind of the expectation is that they're designed where you can have a single Lord of the Rings core set and only own the saga because that's such a popular thing, right? It's like people just want to go through the story because they love the story. Like the deluxes are kind of these made up things, so like they very much for theme, like like the theme reasons are a little contrived, I think, for deluxes, right? Like these aren't stories that really existed; they're the FG made up ones, and so in the deluxe, in the sagas, like they really wanted to help, I think, like build these kind of decks that you could go through those scenarios with, like you're going through escaping the Nazgul and Fellowship of the Ring. So they have these like Hobbit decks, right? That both feel thematic and are actually like that Hobbit pre-constructed deck is like legit, like good deck, right? Like, and similar to the Hobbit, right? Like they had basically a dwarven Fellowship kind of thing. That again was like probably the first actual archetype in Lord of the Rings because it was the first archetype that had enough cards to kind of build a full deck around, right? You just got enough dwarves between Khazad-dûm and kind of that first Hobbit box.
Yeah, for sure. Ryan has another comment here. It says, "Yeah, with my time as limited as it is, deck construction takes up too much away from actually playing." He says, and I think that's a really good point. I've seen that mentioned a lot of times. Like, it depends on where you find your enjoyment, right? If enjoyment is just literally playing the game, then yeah, I can see why something like deck construction would not be your cup of tea. I know for myself, and I'm assuming for you as well, Terence, that you also find a lot of enjoyment over the process of putting together that deck, figuring out those combinations, those synergies. And so for me, that is part of the game. That is not like something outside the game. That is a piece of the game for me.
Yeah, I agree with that. I do think there's part of it that I can appreciate that sentiment because like I have a weekly Lord of the Rings group where we have game night and sometimes it does feel like homework of oh crap I don't have a deck actually built to take with me. Luckily, like there's a famous person in our group called Bjorn who always brings like 6 or 8 decks with him every time.
Mm-hmm.
So like you can just show up because we do want people who maybe not even play Lord of the Rings to be able to kind of join us and play. But generally, I like to bring my own deck. So if I don't have a thing, I have to like actually go and like build it. And so, given some of those time pressures, I can appreciate that sentiment. But I will say one of the things that kind of comes out of this though is like I think one of the big benefits for LCGs is like I do think 50% of the game for me personally is actually deck construction. Like
Yeah.
just as much as playing, part of the enjoyment is building the decks, and the other part for me is like I know people have different stances on how they appreciate this kind of preview and the spoiler articles that come out from FFG. But I like love that stuff and I eat it up. And I really enjoy just being able to kind of see some of the spoiler cards, or they spoil an investigator or a hero, and you get those gears turning your head of like, ooh, like this changes up the game, or I can do these combos with this, or and they don't like show you everything generally. I think the latter half of the Lord of the Rings stuff, like near the end, I think almost all the cards were basically spoiled in some of those preview articles, but the like generally it's just like you see a card or two, and oftentimes I feel like this is when LCG is at its best. Is like it changes the game where like potentially cards or heroes or things that weren't as good. And this happens all the time in LCGs. I've especially seen in Lord of the Rings, and definitely happens in Marvel Champions too, where like if I think like a lot of people considered Thor like very disappointing when he first came out, just because it wasn't this very good solo hero, and a lot of people play Marvel Champion solo, but he's pretty decent in multiplayer and kind of the cards and deck that came out at the time. But like I think Thor is like pretty good now after like all these cards have come out, and like you start to see like even just some of the spoiler articles like, ooh, that like combos really well with that hero, even though these cards aren't necessarily like built for that hero, right? And so
Right.
I think those kind of things is what makes LCGs exciting, is that it's shifting and evolving, and it is this thing that is not static.
Yeah, absolutely. There's another comment I want to pull up here. Alex says, "Do you think LCGs can put off new players once a few years have passed and there's a lot of content?" I've heard this comment several times when new players want to get into Arkham, Lord of the Rings, Game of Thrones, Netrunner. Um, I absolutely have seen this myself as well. I remember talking to someone who was interested in getting to Living Card Game, and judging by, I asked them like, "What are your likes and dislikes? What type of things do you like about games?" And as they described it, honestly, it sounded like Lord of the Rings would be like a really good fit for them. So when they went to go look at it, they saw that this was like a couple years ago, so like 8 years worth of content was out there, and their response was immediately like, "Nope, nope, too much out there. I can't handle it. It's just too much information." And at the time, I think Arkham was newer, so there's less products out there. And like, okay, I'll just jump in this one because it's easier to digest and understand that. So I definitely see that happening. I don't know what your experience about that, Terrence.
Yeah, I think there's two parts of this. One, there is, uh, yeah, like, is it overwhelming? I think the answer is yes, but on the flip side, like, I would pose the question, like, it's a cooperative game. You don't have to buy all of it.
That's true.
Like, you
True.
can actually just buy. Like, my recommendation for a lot of people is like, especially with the revised core set coming from Arkham, I would definitely wait for that. If you're interested in getting to Arkham, like, I think that's coming out in October. Uh, you can wait till October. But like like those course, you can just buy the core set and see if it is for you, right? Like that would be my first recommendation. Like, don't buy the entire. It's not Kickstarter. You don't have to go all in, right? Like you can. It is retail. You can't just get it. It there's games with lots of expansions, right? That exists out there. So like I see Aeon's End behind you, right? Like you can't just buy one of those boxes. You don't have to buy the entire card pool of all of Aeon's End. Like Eldritch Horror has how many expansions at this point, right? But that doesn't stop people from getting into it. Like you don't.
True.
I feel like there's this mentality in the board game hobby for people who are really into it that it's like this collective collectionism that's about if I'm gonna get it, I have to own all of it. That's definitely like not true, I think, for any game. And so I think you can just get started with a kind of smaller kind of sample size of it and see if it's for you. And then if it is, then kind of go more into it. We mentioned kind of progression style. It's very common, I think, in like Lord of the Rings has been super popular because of the pandemic, right? Like talk about uh, any of these LCGs is a great solo entry, especially when you don't have that play group to kind of fall back on, and they're great games to just be able to play on your own. And it's been really popular, and people have gotten into it, and that has definitely been a thing. But the flip side of my second point is actually getting hold of the packs, even if you want to do something like progression style where you aren't consuming everything all at once, can be challenging because
Right.
there are so many product SKUs, and they go in and out of print, not because they're not going to get printed again, but just because the stock that has been printed, because these games are popular, get bought up, right?
Right.
Like all the LCG lines, like stuff is in print and they go out of print, and you really just have to be patient and be able to wait like however long until they print it again. But they are printing this stuff generally regularly. So don't pay like the $60 scalpel prices for a $15 product.
Yeah. So Terrence, Alex had a follow up question. You already answering this one was, how would you solve this problem? You want to get new players into an LCG with lots of stuff, and I think you hit on everything I was going to mention too, especially the progression style. Like I kind of want to lean to that a little bit more because I also get the impression that I have to make the most optimal deck possible. And don't get me wrong, that's fun to do, but it is also fun to challenge yourself. What can I do with what's presented to me? And so, honestly, you could have like the entire card pool, but don't worry about it. Just grab a portion of it. It could be progression style, doesn't have to be, and just say, okay, with these cards, what is the best outcome I have? And then for me at least, that's how I started around this. Okay, I'm looking at these cards. I like this one card. I'm going to focus on this one card. And with these other cards in front of me, I can build this interesting combo. And then as I start getting more familiar with that, I start remembering, okay, I remember that this card was good. I like these effects. Let's look at some more cards. And I start expanding that a little bit more, a little bit more, a little bit more, and eventually you get to, okay, I've got a good understanding of the card pool, the whole card pool, and I can go hog wild, right? So at least that's how I approach it. And then this also kind of gets into Spycom had a question. How do you get good in deck construction? As a solo player that just started in Lord of the Rings, I'm having a blast, but no idea if I'm doing truly stupid stuff or making rookie mistakes.
You're definitely probably doing those things as everyone does. Like
Yes.
I imagine this is true for you, Steve. Like I played a good
Hey,
amount
thanks,
of
Ryan.
Magic, kind of growing up as a kid, and that gave me exposure to deck building. But doesn't mean when I came to Lord of the Rings that my decks were good. They were terrible.
Yeah.
Like my recommendation is I mentioned this guy Bjorn, who lives in Austin where I live, and he actually has this really great website called Hog Bjorn. And there's both the search engine, but you want the WordPress blog. And on it, there's a thing called Bjorn's Path. And this is how I got started in kind of Lord of the Rings. Of like, actually, it was just like, how do I actually build decks for Lord of the Rings? Because it is a different game, and each of these games are different. So like, though there are similarities, like you're not going to approach deck building the same. And if you try to, like, your deck's not necessarily going to be very good for that game. And so Bjorn's Path actually just goes through, I think the first cycle, I want to say. I think it's the entire first cycle. I could be wrong. But he goes through and plays through the core set. And then kind of what's cool is like for each quest, he like talks about building a deck. And, this isn't necessarily the best deck you can build. It's just a deck, right? And then for each scenario, he'll then talk about like changes he's making to the deck and why. And I think that part of the thing is what's kind of really illuminating for like how you can build better decks is like being able to read why someone is like making these kind of choices and changes. And especially if you have a limited card pool that is just the core set or the first cycle, like he'll go through and look at like the new cards that come in each of those packs and then kind of analyze like they're not necessarily like the cards are bad, but like why they don't fit in this deck or why this particular card is a good fit for this deck, and then what cards you may want to take out, right? And so I think like reading through someone's kind of journey through that is really good. I mean, he has, I want to say like thousands of decks built at this point, so he's a prolific deck builder. But like that helped me when I first started Lord of the Rings, for sure.
Yeah, and for me, for deck construction, I like to find a card that I want to focus on. It could be a hero, it could be investigator, could be just a card I haven't used before. And what I like to do, I completely agree with everything Terence said about using those resources. But if you want to do it without those resources, what I've done is looking at keywords or text on the cards, honestly, because a lot of times in these card games is they'll have like a traits, for example, like superpower or something, or defense, or for like champions or something, or mystic, or like Lord of the Rings might have a mount, for example, as a trait. So like I will just do a search on these websites for those keywords and get a big list of them. And then normally those cards will somehow interact with this other card I chose, and I just start throwing them all in there, and I start filling in the gaps after that point. As I start seeing what's out there, like, okay, cool, I've got a lot of attachments, I got a lot of allies, I got a lot of resources. What can I use to help balance that out? And I go from there. But ultimately, in the end, do I make great decks all the time? Absolutely not. And I'm pretty sure Terrence can agree that I've made a lot of failures decks. In fact, he's like, why? Why are you not playing Test of Will? Because I didn't want to? I don't know. So, but it's fine.
Hey man, there's some really bad treacheries in that game. I don't know why you hate it. Like why you, I get why you don't want to do it, but like, man, if you're bringing a spirit deck, like I feel like there's this assumption that you're going to cancel treacheries.
That's
Like,
right. That's
I
right.
feel like that's like kind of staple there. It's like when Peter in Marvel Champions, he like brings this. He's like, okay, I'm gonna bring this Justice deck, and I'm like, bro, like you're. I am forwarding more than you. What the? Why did you build a Justice deck? It's like, so I can confuse and flip to the other side. I'm just like, I mean, yes, I guess you can do that, but this is a multiplayer game. Like, I expect you
Right.
to handle the
Right.
threat. You asked specifically, I believe, on Lord of the Rings was the question, right? Some general tips
Yes.
that I would give you when I started out that have been helpful to me is like allies are super strong, And I would look at building 40 or 50%, so 20 to 25 cards in your deck starting with allies that you can play, just because you get so much action economy out of them, would be my recommendation. As you kind of get further in the game and you understand the game better, like that is not a hard, fast rule, but that's like a kind of generally good recommendation when you're starting. Um, some of the rules that I still use today as well are like, I want to build a quest for a pure true solo deck, like with 6. Like I want to be able to quest 6 on the first turn. So look at your heroes or like kind of the allies you're going to play on your opening turn, or rely to be able to do that, because that's kind of generally the guideline you're going to want for a lot of these quests. Is like 6 willpower is kind of a really good benchmark there. And then the other things that kind of get you ahead is like, there's really two things. It's like action economy against the encounter deck, and so how you get that is card draw and resource acceleration, right? So like having cards that allow you to get more than just top decking, because top decking kind of sucks, but happens. Like you want to be able to kind of get and see more cards or access the cards you want to get. So having some ability to do that, and then the other ability is being able to pay for those cards that you're getting, right? So like if you're able to kind of cover those bases, and you may not be able to cover all of them perfectly, but I think if you're able to cover, like use those as kind of guideposts, I think you'll be able to build at least a decent deck, regardless of what else it does.
Absolutely. Yeah, I follow the same guidelines that you mentioned, specific for Lord of the Rings. I'm not sure those guidelines would be for the other games. It's a little bit. I'm not as I don't feel as confident building those as much.
I think there are similar things in Arkham when I was starting out, just like you want to have probably like a third or a half your deck, I think, in assets, because those are the kind of things that give you just make your character better, right?
Right.
Like that tableau.
Right.
And assets can be both like allies and weapons, and like generally you want to have not too many things that are competing for those slots, because in Arkham, like Lord of the Rings has generic restricted, but like a lot of attachments aren't even restricted. But like in Arkham, right, like you have hand slots, mystic, arcane slots, ally slots. You have a limited number of these, and so you don't necessarily want to have like 10 hand slots that you have to discard one to play that, put that in play. So you kind of want to have maybe like double or a little bit more than what you can actually put there, so you actually draw into it. And then you kind of want to have enough, a handful of skill cards that kind of make up it, and then the other events, right, that are kind of giving you those boosts of stuff.
Sure.
At least that's how I started. And obviously, like as the cycle, like for all these games, like as the game progresses, those rules are very bendable. Like you definitely are going to build a lot of decks that don't follow those guidelines.
Yep, definitely. Cool. Well, I think this stream has gone on a lot for the discussion. It's been an awesome discussion. Honestly, this went way longer than I expected, but honestly, because you guys jumped on the chat and asked some good questions, and it kept going. But I want to thank everyone for joining. I got one more thing I want to transition into, and that's to do the giveaway. So I did a giveaway, asked people what type of information they want to see in this type of format. And honestly, because of your comments, we're creating stuff like this, where we're going to be looking at games and comparing games to each other, and have a more of a general chat around multiple games, essentially, as opposed to doing playthroughs and a review specifically on one game. This is going to be looking across the board. But yeah, so if you haven't, if you still want to get feedback, just drop it in the comments below. We're always looking for topics and content to cover. But let's get to the contest real quick. So, we are giving away this dice tray. So this is something my wife made. It's got some neoprene on the bottom, so it's actually pretty silent. And let me pull up the Wheel of Fortune, as we're calling it here, and spin to see which lucky winner is going to get it. So here we go. Okay, Kevin, looks like you are lucky winner for this dice tray. So I will reach out and contact you, and we'll get that in your hands. But thanks, guys, for watching and hanging out with us. And we'll be back next week for another chat. I think the next thing on stream is I think it's going to be Gloomhaven tonight. They're doing Jaws of the Lion, so stick around for that. But Terence, thanks so much for hanging out with me.
Yeah, always a pleasure. Always happy to talk about LCGs. I actually prepped a ton of stuff that I never got to.
We can, yeah, I know.
uh,
We could probably talk for another hour easy on this, no problem. So if you want to hear more about this LCG talk or specific topics on this, drop in the comments below. We'll generate some more discussions. This is not going away. So cool. Well, thanks everyone for joining, and we'll see you at the next stop. Bye
Bye,
bye.
everyone.